um, is that it became really clear to me that it was really going to take emotional fortitude, to make it as right as we could, and that was going to look a lot of different ways.
Mm. I mean, I remember being in the hospital, but I don't remember the time immediately after.
Yeah, and your cousins were so curious.
Yeah, I do.
You're like the center of attention,
Yeah,
and they'd all line up to get their finger pricked so they could find out what their blood sugar was about. And so that process of, them thinking in an, in an odd way, this was pretty cool.
yeah, right.
Wow. You know,
It's pretty relevant though. I mean, there was like a normalization that uh, that happened like almost immediately in that way. It
yeah.
was like quite healing. I never really considered that. Like the whole family was like, "Oh, I guess this is what we're doing now. I guess we're checking blood sugars."
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, I guess this isn't weird." Like that was nice. I felt less of a stigma, which certainly came up like at different times later on, where some
Yeah.
people were, like, oh, you should be doing that elsewhere. And of course, we dealt with that in an Ontario,
Yeah.
but
I imagined.
never, that was never a thing with the family. I think that was really healing right from the beginning.
Yeah, it's just they never made you feel other or different. They actually just made you feel special.
Right.
And they also knew now what it felt like to have their finger pricked. And so, you kind of raised up in their eyes, the courage that they saw in you. And I think that it fed itself to me, certainly with my siblings and Grammy and Papa, the way that they surrounded us and supported us. So you're asking specifically of kind of how did I resource myself? It just was so organic because of where we were and being encircled in this love and support during.
I'm curious if that came up at all, because I feel like for parents that might be watching, like they feel a need to kind of jump in and be like, that's, like you gotta figure this out, like whenever you do X, your blood sugar is bad or something like that. And one thing that in my Zen practice and Zen training that I've appreciated so much, it's kind of a lot harder, but it resonates with the way that I think you raised me and let me figure this thing out in a sense, is you're kind of made to like bumble around and like be a little bit of an idiot and like stumble and figure it out on your own. And it's makes a big difference when you figure it out on your own versus somebody throttling you into like behaving a certain way.
Yeah.
But when you figure out on your own, oh, naturally, this is how it's done. Like this frequent trap that parents fall into is like getting regimented to a degree that there's almost like an expectation that it's going to go right. And that to me is just so destructive and self-defeating, because as anybody who's lived with type 1 has known, and hopefully any parent, if they're watching closely, although sometimes there's too much emotion wrapped up in it to recognize this, often you can do all of the right things and it still goes really poorly. So I felt like really grateful in the sense of there was a degree of like regimentation, if that's a word, early on to make sure that I had some sense of stability. But over time, it was like, you learn all the notes and then you forget that shit and go play.
Yeah.
That's by Louis Armstrong, I think. But that's kind of how it was. It was like, all right, like let's figure this thing out, and like your life doesn't need to fit into these small boxes so that you can control your diabetes, because frankly, even if you put your life in all those boxes, you still probably aren't going to have perfect control of your diabetes. And paradoxically, it worked remarkably well, and like my A1Cs since forever have been really, really good. And that's like that's an odd kind of effect of like more laissez-faire, and yet it actually has turned out better in a way. So I'm curious where that came from also.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you asked that question because a couple really strong memories came up. Um, I remember at the beginning that regimenting your blood sugar in my mind. Oh, that's good and that's bad.
Mm.
So I had this sort of these opposing emotions then around it. And it was really quick that I realized I had to get rid of that dichotomy, that language completely, and just be with what it was, and problem solve. Because I felt like being in the good and the bad made it really difficult to problem solve because I was kind of weighed down on one side, and then I wasn't at my best to problem solve, or I was elated and getting kind of, oh, all is well, and then it didn't play off. As you said, we didn't know the different factors that were at play.
Right.
I mean, we still don't, I'm sure, but a little bit better of understanding all the different variables that are coming into play.
Yeah.
And that was a turning point for me in kind of bringing my nervous system down, is getting rid of the judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That just really resonates with me because as a child growing up with type 1, and even as an adult actually, although I face this less now, having like hopefully done some processing around it and like confronting, what in me is responding to this. But one of the things I can say is like one of the most difficult and stressful things, and early on it was with you guys. I think you and Dad got over it pretty quickly, and then with other people afterwards was when I would test my blood sugar, and there's the first response of like, oh God, I hope it's good. And then you see what it is, good, to use in the sense that you're talking about, good or bad. And then seeing the number and maybe it's off in a way that I'm like, oh, I know that's not ideal. And then not even having time to be like, oh, I feel bad about that. But the next thing is like, I really don't want whoever I'm with to like judge me for that. Whether early on was like you or Dad saying, oh, like, what's your number? And you might even remember this, but I stopped actually telling you what my blood sugars were.
yeah.
And I would just say, oh yeah, it's like, it's high or it's low. And the next question is obviously like, how high or how low? And I'd be like, like, we'll deal with it. Because that was so stressful for me, was feeling like judgment, like I had done something wrong when it was off. And I think that's just rampant. I think it's rampant. And I don't want to like belittle the conversation in here. I've heard like a lot of CVEs, and I know the messaging with in the work that I've done with JDRF is this way of really making sure that you're not telling people, oh, it's okay, your blood sugar can be whatever, and like that's not the important part. Definitely it's the important part, and we have to do the smart things.
Yeah.
It feels a lot better when you're healthy, as I can attest to, but like the real struggle for so many people is thinking that they can actually control what happens. You can do all of the right things, and we should all be doing all of the right things. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's difficult to do the right things, and sometimes it's not actually as difficult as we make it. But I think the most important part for a lot of people now is I've done all the right things and I didn't get the result that I wanted. And I feel bad because it feels bad to have a bad blood sugar, and I feel bad because I feel like it's my fault. And now I might even feel bad because my parents are saying, oh my God, what have you done? So it's like a 3-layer. And just to step out of that and be like you were saying, like, it's not good or bad. It is what it is. And like, what's the next most important thing to do? So sorry, we got kind of off track, but I'm curious where that perspective came from.
I guess I had a lot of thoughts about how we were going to define this disease in your life. And I knew that would be or our relationship to one another in it. And
Yeah.
I think that was my strongest feeling is relationally, how do we want to be together? Um, and so I think that's really where it came from. Um,
Yeah.
because it's so interesting that there was a lot of structure in my head with it, right? It's not as if I was, the laissez-faire thing was just not existent internally, right? A lot was going on. Okay. And, whether it be, making sure that the supplies were there or the appointments were made, whatever was needed in the lineup that I had control over to, to sort of scaffold the healthy pathway for you with the disease. But so that was there. And that actually gave me some emotional footing, like that I could do. But when it went into the realm of your emotional health and also our family's emotional health with it, that was something that I knew needed a lot of breathing space, literally. A lot of slowing down, a lot of just like kind of remembering who we are, separate and apart from the disease.
Yeah, I think you guys put a lot of trust in me pretty early on, and I'm curious about that, and I'm grateful for it. I think it turned out mostly okay, although certainly we did have our scary episodes. But as we also talked about, like somehow by some miracle, on the whole, for many years, my blood sugars have been really, really good. Um, so the result has ended up being quite good. One thing I am curious about, you were talking about like how this was going to define me, and one thing that I was kind of thinking back on growing up was being so resistant to meeting, like intentionally meeting other people that had type 1 or going to camps. And I actually look back at that and I'm like, I would never say that I would want my life to have gone differently so far, because I think it's beautiful and it's wonderful, but potentially a missed opportunity. Like I totally think that anybody should take those opportunities to meet other people with type 1, and I feel fortunate that I'm doing it now. But at the time I was like adamantly opposed to it. Like I was almost had like a repulsion, and I'm really curious how that was like received by you and just what you made of that.
uh, Definitely it was.
It wasn't even that important. Like maybe it wasn't, maybe you were like, all right, well, I guess we're not doing that, but like I went to these like sleepover camps that weren't
Yeah.
related, and you were like, I mean, God knows if you're having panic attacks back home about it. But
Well, I think I made the camp counselors a bit crazy because I wrote like novels about like the procedures and guidelines, and it was really my own safety net.
I think that was important.
Yeah. I guess what I would tell you about the way that you were entering into your relationship with diabetes and the community, the T1D community, you weren't ready.
Yeah.
You just weren't ready. And I just, there was so many things that you were dealing with at the time. That was one thing we could do to honor you and make you feel in control.
Yeah.
And I knew, just your spirit and how it was emerging, that you would get there.
Mm-hmm.
And it needed to be on your time, not your dad or my timeline or even the JDRF on their timeline of what they might, you could have been helpful in some ways. And I did recognize that, but my greatest, priority was to make sure that you felt in control with what was happening in your life. So it was really very much a deliberate. It was definitely noted that your resistance, and it was really deliberate to be like, no, he needs to be able to write this script for himself. And how beautiful it's unfolded.
Yeah, it's come back full circle in a funny way.
Yeah, I think at the time, and when I used the words that you weren't ready, it wasn't a place that would define it in a positive way early on. You had a really robust kind of family life, friends, and I think that as humans, our need to belong was really strong, and you didn't want to not belong anymore. This is the way I saw it, to what you knew before. And this unknown was just something that, you've over time, you recognized that it was a really strong place of belonging.
Yeah.
But at the time you didn't know, and made so much sense to me. Yeah.
Almost like,
Yeah. Certainly. So it was really important to keep my own stress down, and in check, so that that energy didn't get passed to you. And so, and specifically, if there were times I would see, like, oh my God, you forgot your diabetes kit. Like, it's the third time. Like, you left it on the football field. What is that? Wait, is the insulin even working now? Because it was in the sun for a period of time. I mean, all sorts of things that, were coming up. But
my friends still make fun of me for that.
yeah, and there were times that I would just be like, but I was being driven by my own fear, rather than, and I knew that. And so I just sat back and be like, okay. So I had so many backup diabetes kits available. I just had them all stuffed up in the cabinet, because I'm like, what the heck? Let's just get another one. Or I get a call from the teacher, or, whatever the incident that would come up. And yes, there were some initial internal reactions of, oh, Sam. And then it was quick to just grab it and say, what? Why am I doing that? I'm doing that at the end of the day. I wanted to make sure it was as smooth as it could be for you. Well, heck, if I had gone off and, gotten frustrated with you, or, demanded certain things, that was the last thing that was going to keep you from being able to, stay calm. And yeah. And so I think it was a bumbling. And I didn't know, like, it's funny as I look back, I mean, it wasn't like deliberate. I guess subconsciously it was deliberate, but it wasn't like I set out to let you bumble around. Right. It was more.
I mean, that paints a picture. I say that because I think it's goofy, and I resonate with bumble around. Let me figure it out on my own, I think. You didn't try to figure it out for me and then say, all right, I figured it out. I'm the adult here. Here's the model. Now you go. It was very collaborative, and even more weighted towards, like, you trusting me to do it. That's how it felt.
Yeah. I have an image that really comes to mind, from the time that you were first diagnosed to now, where you are today, and the way that it was internalizing it, and sort of watching it unfold or blossom. What could be either word, really, and that is, when you were first diagnosed, it was like a newborn that was swallowed really tight, and that gives them security. and comfort. And then as they get a little bit older, they start kind of chafing at it, a little elbow here, a little foot there, kicking up, and you loosen it.
Uh-huh.
And then you see that they are safe to do, maybe to get up and lean up against, maybe not walk yet, but maybe just to lean up against a table to stand, anyway. And so it's just that receiving blanket you end up releasing its hold, the kind of how tight it's being held.
Yeah. And I think like this disease in particular kind of course, always dependent on the age, but it kind of forces kids to grow up a little faster anyways. So that maturing process can happen more quickly. And like everybody's circumstances are unique, but I guess my encouragement would be to say like, to encourage it, to like allow it to happen as quickly as it can, because like the more self-directed, I think the better, as long as there's still support. Just all of the like crazy transitions in my life and things that you let me do, like I don't know, that's unfathomable to so many people. To list a couple of them, not in like a self-aggrandizing way, but just to say like you guys really had some faith. I mean, like of course there were the summer camps that I went to early on, much of which were like very disconnected, like would be long hiking trips. I'm like, if something goes wrong, something has really gone wrong, especially with a bunch of people that have no idea about type 1. So there was that. And then like going off to college, I think that's a transition that everybody, I mean, you can speak to that. That's everybody has to experience that with their kids if they're diagnosed before college. And they go to college, of course, is the other assumption. And then college football, like, I mean, you know personally the degree to which I was training, which I don't know if that ever was concerning to you. But to shout that out, my mom a couple times went to go work out at this crazy place that we used to work out at, and at that place, you never threw up though. You never.
No.
They
Yeah.
had a board. They had a board at the place that basically kept track of the number of people who had thrown up while working out, and I can say that I was more than one number on that board. So like there was that, and then traveling for months at a time while abroad, like whether in India or Brazil or elsewhere. I'm curious what came up for you for that, and if there was some feeling of like, well, don't screw this up, like don't die. Like one of my earliest memories also was meeting this young woman, Teresa, who I'm sure you remember, who must have been in her late 20s or early 30s when I met her. And she ended up passing away after one or two times that I saw her of complications with type 1 because she didn't take care of herself when she was traveling. And I'm curious if that went through your mind. I'm curious, like everything that came up in all of those transitions and like really letting go each time. Like, how did you bring yourself to let go? And like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they were leaps. They were leaps of faith for sure, is what I would call them. And there was definitely constriction in the heart space when you would embark on these adventures that you went on or goals that you set for yourself. But it's really getting back to sort of the blanket wrapping around you, sort of an metaphor. Is it was just a time to let that part go. I mean, certainly there was conversations that we would have, about what kind of supplies you had, how are you going to keep it cool, at the right temperature, when it's about 110 degrees out in India and you're hiking, backpacking. And what is the safeguard? What is the fallback? So there were conversations about it. I just, I knew you needed to live your life. And I felt that you knew what your safety net was around you if something happened. I mean, as I look back at the whole camp situation when you were what 9 and 10 years old that you went to with your cousins, that that might have been a little denial on my part. I'm just going to admit it. I remember I went up there and I don't know if you knew this, but I was actually there for the first 4 days at a little other campsite, not very far from you, just to make sure that you were okay and just make sure they understood what the hell they were doing, right? Because there's so many misunderstandings about the disease in the public. I think many sort of go into a default about it being oh, he just doesn't have to eat that, or it's food related, or
I'm glad that you did the push, and maybe it was a leap of faith, but again, it was like it was faith. Like you had faith in me that I was going to figure it out and not be stupid. And I think like in a weird way, like knowing that it was kind of on me made it very real. I was like, yeah, clearly nobody else here is going to take care of my diabetes for me.
It's funny because I was going to use, as funny as I'm looking at those swords, I was thinking about what brought me to my knees initially when you were diagnosed is this idea of that you would be potentially battling this disease, for your lifetime, possibly for your lifetime. And I can't help but look behind you and see those swords, like, yeah.
Yeah, and I think for so long it felt like I was battling with it, and only recently it feels like I'm harmonious with it. And that sounds so nice and flowery, but also even in the last few months of my life, recently it's been a little better because my blood sugars have been kind of back under good control. But I don't know that there's a period of my life outside of the last few months that I've felt so in tune with the highs and lows of my blood sugar. It sounds, oh, that's such a nice spiritual thing, but it was like really shitty. Like I would get really depressed when my blood sugar was dropping fast, and not even out of a sense of self-judgment, although there was also that, but I just physiologically, my body would take on the symptoms of being depressed. Like it was a rapid mood change. But that, I think, letting that into, letting those experiences in, not numbing myself to that, was also very important. I think like sometimes we shield ourselves a little too much and we don't let ourselves go through the really incredible benefits and positives that can come out of having some challenge forced on you.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, and I think in tandem with that is the vulnerability that goes hand in hand when you are experiencing those challenges, right? And what you do with that vulnerability. I think a lot, I think for me, just sort of the greatest just revelation, but also gifts in this journey is that the pathway to vulnerability that has really opened up just unbelievable connections in our lives. It's just like, I couldn't really have imagined it. Of just in our own immediate family and who we are with each other. And so much of it had to do with sort of heading this straight on and not being afraid to be vulnerable with it and honest about it. And then also, I think, having fortitude with it too. Like, okay, like I want to say, well, now what? Yeah, this totally sucks. And now what are we going to do with it? And I just, yeah, I really marvel. I marvel at your own spirit to have, navigated these waters.
Thanks.
A blessing. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, I love you lots.
I love you.
Well, I think we can keep going on for this for so long.
Thank you. I wasn't sure how this was, I wasn't sure how this was going to go. And I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, this was fun. This was fun. I hope it was valuable for anybody that's watched. Thank you if you've made it this far. It was a long conversation.
Thank you.
And see you soon.